Okay, great. So once again, a very, very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us and, as Gautam said, chosen to spend Friday evening with us. We really hope that this will be engaging and interesting and relevant to your areas of work. And we hope to have a lot of lively interaction. As by way of introduction, I am Natasha, and I co-lead the project around Uncommon Ground at Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. Uncommon Ground is an effort to re-establish the balance between Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar by deepening society's capacity for dialogue and conflict resolution. We imagine this both as an approach and an end state. And we feel that this work has become even more relevant today, where channels of communication have increased tremendously, but conversation might have decreased. And when we say conversation, we mean people's ability to deeply listen and understand nuances and really engage with the lived realities from which people on the other side are speaking from. So we feel that this is a very important area of work. And as we set out to build this field of work, we're also very grateful to have CAMP, Advanced Mediation Practice, alongside with us, supporting us in bringing the best practices from the mediation space into the social development sector. And this journey is still new for us. We have a lot to learn, but there's a lot we have learned as we have started to think through ways in which this societal muscle for dialogue can be strengthened. So I will be handing over very soon to some of my collaborators at CAMP for their introductions as well. But before that, a very quick note on logistics. We are going to be recording the webinar, and we will share it with everyone once the session is done. The chat function will be open, so please feel free to use it, and we will respond to any sort of comments as well and reactions that you might have. We will also be pausing for questions, so please feel free to ask questions. And if there is, at any point, if you'd like to raise your hand and you'd like to get involved in dialogue, then please feel free to do so. We would love that as well. So with this, I will hand over to Tara and Krishna. Please invite you to start your videos, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. I am Tara. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep my video off. It's 6:30 in the morning where I am right now, and perhaps best that you hear me and not see me right now. So to quickly introduce myself, I'm Tara. I'm the co-founder of CAMP Arbitration and Mediation Practice. We are a group of lawyers who were exposed to a new framework for dispute resolution, where the framework of right, wrong, which is where we were trained and which is where we practiced for many years, changed when we learned about mediation, a collaborative way where we bring parties together, engage in dialogue, as Natasha pointed out, and work with them to find their own solutions, which are typically win-win solutions. And through this framework, not only have we seen the ability of disputes to be resolved in a quick, cost-effective manner, but we've also seen the ability for resolutions that are sustainable, that are long-lasting, and that are able to preserve the balance of society. When I met Gautam over a year ago and started our conversations about how we could extend mediation from legal disputes or beyond legal disputes, and understood the work that Rohini had been playing in this space through the conversations that she had been having on finding commonality between divergent viewpoints, the whole idea of Uncommon Ground was born. And as Natasha pointed out, we're early in our journey. There's been a lot of learning, and we're excited to be able to share through Krishna, who has been leading this project, what we have learned so far and how we could all move forward to a space where the framework for conflict, which is an inevitable part of human relationships, can be used in ways that are more productive as opposed to destructive. So thank you all for being here and looking forward to sharing our learning with you. Over to you, Krishna.
Thank you, Tara and Natasha. Good evening and namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this Friday evening. Yes, it has been a very young, we are a young organization, young initiative, and but it's been a very, very exciting time. And what times to be living in and leading a project such as this. And yeah, I'm just gonna quickly begin screen sharing, and could someone just let me know in the comments, please, if you can see that? I assume, yeah. All righty. Thank you. Thank you, Ashutosh. Thanks, Avinash. So as Tara was mentioning, this is a co-created initiative between CAMP and the Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. And just to give you a bit of context, the whole idea of uncommon ground is something that, in fact, some of you might have seen the TV shows or even read the book from about 10 years ago with the same name, Uncommon Ground, which was aimed at bringing together leaders from across Samaj Sarkar and Bazaar and getting them to engage in dialogues to find some degree of common ground. Now, of course, that had its own very, very important place in being able to in being able to facilitate those discussions at the influencer and a leader level. But I think somewhere the idea has always remained that what if this could become a civic muscle, a societal muscle? And how do we get to that? How do we get to that point where conversations, but conversations towards outcomes are possible, not just only when they are at an influencer level, but can we grow that or develop, add to that as a civic muscle so that we are able to engage in more of those in our everyday lives, everyday work, everyday interactions. So briefly, the agenda for today, I just want to share with you the logic or the basics behind the method and the dialogic method before then diving into what the method is. And I will wrap up with a little bit, a very brief introduction of the kind of work we've been doing so far at Uncommon Ground. And we would be most excited to hear your thoughts and inputs as well as any questions you have. And I know we have discussions scheduled for the end, but please feel free to use the chat function to raise any comments or any questions you may have at any point of time. Okay. So yeah, Friday evening. Thank you once again for being here. And thank you also for being here on what I believe is a festive weekend in most parts of India. I know for sure it was for me. And the highlight of my day, which I actually wanted to share with you all, has been this. I'm sure some of you recognize it. Waiting to see the yeses and the nos in the chat, please. So, by way of introduction, I am of Tamil descendants, but I've lived all my life in Bangalore. I mean, I was born and brought up and have lived most of my life in Bangalore. And festivals are a great time for me because there's always double food involved. There's always the Kannadiga side of the food involved and the Tamil side of the food involved. And one common food which I really enjoy is this tamarind rice, puliyogare. And bear with me, but it's just so amazing the way my mom makes it. And this is the temple style that I have to describe it to you. You know, she has to take the imli, the tamarind, boil it in oil and spices for about 3 or 4 hours till it glazes over into a kind of sauce. Then you add other things to it, and then you mix the rice with it, and you allow it to really marinate for a couple of hours before you add some dry powder over it, which is again another bunch of secret spices that I have no clue about, and you serve it, which is what she did today. And I, dig into this thing with all the gusto I can mount, or shovel a spoonful into my mouth, and I bite in on this little piece of seedless red chili, which has been marinating for hours, and this burst of tamarind just fills my mouth. quick check. Okay, Ashish says his mouth is already watering. Quick check. How is the rest of you feeling? Mouth watering, a little tingling on your tongue, maybe even a small tendency to swallow. Sahana once said, "Dunzoed, I will give you mum's address and you could do that." Anuradhi says, "I could practically taste that." So hey, I'm going to ask you a question. Where in, or rather, what part of your mind do you think this reaction is coming from? This almost can taste it, wanting to eat it, mouth is watering. Just waiting for the replies to come in. Half the votes are in. Let's give it another 30 seconds. To the 30% who are yet to vote, no dunzo or puliogre for you. Just kidding. Give it another 10 seconds for the vote, and then I'll be closing the poll. Right. And there we go. The results on your screen. So 57% of the people here today think that this reaction is instinctive. 43% think it's an emotional reaction, and 0% think it's a rational reaction. How would you feel then if I told you that this reaction was coming completely from the part of your brain that's known as the thinking brain? And here's how that happens. What triggers this response in us when we talk about food, when we talk about things we enjoy, or experiences someone else, someone's holiday that we relate to and feel and think we almost feel the sun on our face? All these experiences are triggered by something called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons is actually, it's one of those amazing things that we know a lot about and know very little about. We know a lot about it in mammals in general, and we've been able to make amazing conclusions about it in humans. And there's still so much we're finding out about it every day. These are the triggers that help us learn. These are the triggers that help us relate to one another. These are the triggers that help us experience or co-experience things that others are experiencing. And what's very, very interesting about these, something like a mirror neuron, is that it actually is very, very intrinsic to social interaction and the social behavior of, whether it's us, whether it's our, well, distant or not so distant cousins, the other primates, or even other mammals. This social function is located in the same part of the brain as the cognitive or rational function of the brain. Which is not to say that emotion and instinct don't play a huge part. The emotional brain is where we process most inputs from, response or threat. And then triggers the instinctive brain, which typically gives you three responses, which could include flight, fight, or freeze. So, for example, you are taking a jungle walk and you run into a particularly nasty looking, I don't know, panther. Some of us might think it's a reward, some of us might think it's a threat, and how we behave might even be triggered automatically. And let's say you decide it's a threat and you start running instead of, I don't know, freezing, flight, whatever you think is the best part of that time. The instinctive brain is also what is going to make sure that the adrenaline runs through you and you run faster and you're able to quite literally think on your feet. Now, fascinating as all this neurobiology is, how does it help us? Because of this very, very important connection between the social part of the social and the rational functions of the brain, the social and the cognitive functions of the brain. So what that allows us to do is basically, if we are able to get the human brain to experience a social engagement, a social interaction, a social experience, that social interaction is going to trigger the thinking brain, which is also, if you remember, the rational part of the brain. And this might then allow for us to be able to A, understand, and B, balance all the messages that the emotional and instinctive part of the brain are putting out along with the thinking brain. And that social process that we try and do, or that we, all that we are trying to use here on the basis of this science, is the dialogic process. I'm just going to pause here briefly, and any questions? Just also a sound check and slide check. All good? If you have any questions or comments, please do use the chat function. Alrighty, moving on then in that case. So next question then. What is dialogue? We're talking about this dialogic process as being a social process that we are using to trigger all these wonderful neurobiological functions towards a determined end. But what exactly is a dialogic process? And when we say dialogue, there are many things that immediately come to mind. Things, lines that are said in a book, famous lines sometimes, lines from other sort of entertainment, audiovisual experiences, that, iconic lines, or very simply the idea of two people having an exchange of words, a conversation, an interaction through communication. But if we get into what dialogue, the word dialogue, and where it comes from, it's quite interesting. Dialogue comes from dialogos, the Greek, which broadly splits into dia, through, and logos, which can mean ideas, words, speech, or even thoughts, depending on the context. And when you put these two together, the meaning that is constructed is actually one that implies a certain degree of community, a certain degree of relationships being involved, a certain degree of cooperation, something that is shared. And I tried this very interesting, not completely scientifically validated experiment, but I tried thinking or looking up the root words or the origin of words for dialogue in some Indian languages that I knew. So whether we use Kannada, which is Samvada, or Urayadal, which is Tamil, the idea still seems to reflect what we are associating with the Greek dialogos, which is that there is this sense of coming together, sharing the sum, and there is this sense of putting things together, co-creating, cooperating, and the exchange of ideas, words, speech. So fascinatingly, the notion of dialogue, even though our everyday use of the word implies either something that one person says or something that two people are saying, is the notion of dialogue in itself has to do more with just speaking or exchanging words. It has this very strong setting in an idea of coming together of ideas, churning of ideas, co-mixing, co-mingling of ideas in order to create something. And this, interestingly, is something that is reflected if we get a little into the a social constructionist view of dialogue, which again informs a host of applied disciplines as well, including management sciences, leadership, org behavior, all of these things, of dialogue being a process that does many things. Most importantly, and to begin with, rather, it is a process that provides a space in which multiple ways of looking at a situation can be brought together. People can present, vocalize their different perspectives, and there is an endpoint or end goal to all of this, that we're doing this in order to be able to generate new ideas, new possibilities, all with a view to creating alternatives, different ways of doing something. And that doing is important because that's the actionability. So whether it is something more intangible, like, hey, advancing our thinking or knowledge, or actually coming to a conclusion on next steps, the whole process is one of coming together, being able to communicate ideas, perspectives, drawing benefit from the multiplicity of perspectives involved in order to create new possibilities and various alternatives. And so let's get into how we use this approach. And this is one of the many elements that we sort of work with. And again, it involves a dialogue, both in the sense of two people, but something a little bit more than that. So imagine this: you have gone to one of your favorite restaurants for a well-earned post-work year dinner, or beginning of the new year dinner. And it's been a tough year, so you really deserve this. Once you get there, you find the whole place is in an uproar. And being very familiar with the place, you make your way into the kitchen and you find that your two favorite chefs, the chefs who lead the place, who run the place, are embroiled in an argument. And what is the argument all about? There is one orange, and both of them insist that they need it for whatever dish it is that they are preparing. What might you do in this situation? Polls on your screens. I hope you can see it. Twenty seconds more to close the poll. Closing the poll. Okay, we have some very interesting results here. So 50% of us here today say that they would split the orange and give half to each chef. Yeah, which sounds fair to me. But we also have some individuals, some have said that they give the orange to one of the two chefs. And we have some other responses in comments as well, which I'd just like to come to. But may I request, if you don't mind, one of those who voted to give the orange to one chef and not the other, would you like to just unmute yourself and share your thoughts, please, if you don't mind? We also have people who are saying, don't give the orange to either of them. Again, feel free to unmute yourself and share something. Sorry, do I need to allow you to unmute? Is that something I need to do on my end? Kindly Forgive my ineptitude. Okay, apparently there's a setting glitch. May I request you to use the comments, please, while I quickly figure this.
If whoever wants to give a response, please feel free to just put it in the chat and we will just unmute your mics. And also, there are no right and wrong answers. So please feel free to just give an interesting rationale as to why. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, is this me giving off class teacher vibes again? I'm so
no,
sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. I just wanted to say that it's very interesting and we'd really love to hear from all the people who said any of them.
Uh-huh.
So please let me know who'd like to, Krishna, what were the two options that you'd like rationales around?
We actually have, I think let's just club all three options where some people are saying they'd like to give the orange to one of the two chefs. There are others who've said that they would not wish to give the orange to either of the two chefs. And we also have people giving us other ideas. Himakshi is asking is telling us that we should ask them which part of the orange they need. Anurati is saying, can I go buy another orange? Anuradha would like to talk to them to see if they can figure out amongst themselves who should get the orange. Uttara says, depends on what they want it for. When is the last time either of them had it? Pratyush is saying, let's talk about who needs the orange more and then take a decision. Kirtana says, speak to both and understand who needs how much, why, split accordingly. Natasha, sorry, I thought you were asking for volunteers from the chefs, Natasha. Are they able to unmute myself is the question though on technicality.
Krishna will be able to unmute it. That's not a problem. If anyone wants to volunteer to speak, then just let us know. Otherwise, you can put in the chat also. That's fine if somebody wants to provide a reason.
Are we giving out prizes, by the way, Natasha? We're not, right? Because there are no right answers, but there's some very interesting answers. And wait, who was it who said, hang on, I'm just looking for who said that. Kirtana, may I invite you to share your thoughts on this? Because you've said you'd speak to both and just understand who needs how much and why, and split accordingly.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you were to do 50-50, I just took into account the fact that someone may need 75%, another may need 25%, or any other proportion. So just knowing why they would need it would help, is where I was coming from.
Thank you for that. I think Himakshi had a similar point where she was saying, ask them which part of the orange they need. Himakshi, would you like to share your thoughts behind that, please? I'd also love to hear from the people who've said split the orange and give half to each chef. Why did you think that was possibly the best solution or effective solution? Do we have any volunteers? Okay. Hang on, we have a raised hand.
Hi.
Hi.
I felt actually that we could try and have a discussion between the two and see if they could come to a solution rather than my making that solution and saying, support each other, guys. Who can support whom? Who can let go? Try and come to a solution of that nature. So make it a three-way rather than my deciding on who should have it or not.
Mhm. Fair enough. That's actually very important that we're getting the chefs to be part of the solution that we're trying to find. But since you're now being part of the conversation, how might you try and get them to reach a conclusion as to what they ought to do? Sorry, is this me? Have I lost everyone? Sorry. Natasha,
No, we can hear you, Krishna.
okay, I can hear you as well. Sorry, I thought I'd lost people. So clearly, there is more than one solution to this, and depending on the context, any of these solutions could be effective. But the point I was trying to make here, or what I was inviting you to think about here, is that looking at the orange as one orange and dividing it in half as being a way to be able to be fair to both people who need the orange is one approach. But another approach would be actually to ask what they want it for, why they need it, how much they need it. And all this information can actually help us reach a situation or reach a solution which allows for us to be able to address both people's interests. And in this case, it's a trick question. Because when you talk to both the chefs, one of them is going to tell you that she wants the peel, and the other is going to tell you that she wants the juice of the orange. So, technically speaking, both of them can use the single orange completely, which may work better than giving them half an orange, in which case either would get either half the peel or half the juice. In this case, what we are trying to do or have been able to effectively do in this simplified situation is to be able to create two oranges where there was only one. And why is that important? Because most of the times, when we look at a situation where there is some sort of a dissonance, some sort of a conflict, some sort of a problem, we tend to find solutions that distribute value. Half an orange, three quarters of an orange. Or when was the last time you had an orange? When was the last time I had an orange? But we are still trying to find ways to distribute in whatever seems a fair manner according to whatever parameters. And we're trying to, yes, it's a good thing to try and involve people in that distribution, but it's still distributing. But when we move from the what question to asking, why do you want this? That allows us to look at various other options. Somebody offered to pop out and get another orange. Okay, that even could be another way of satisfying. Let's say if they both insisted that we need a complete orange each, peel and juice and all, that could be one. Perhaps one of them could actually, maybe when they talk, one chef tells the other, oh, you don't need an orange for this recipe. Here, this is how you actually use an apple. And you know what? It actually tastes better this way. Maybe. But we are not going to be able to figure out any of those solutions unless we move from that two people want the same orange to this gentleman wants the juice of the orange and this lady wants the peel or rind of the orange. And this is a very simplistic situation, but this being able to move from what to why becomes all the more important in today's world where positions are so often presented as binary, whether it's in the media, whether it's in casual conversation. And I'm sure anybody who's been in a family WhatsApp group knows exactly what I mean when you get into some of those discussions mildly put over there. That positions are presented so strongly as binaries, whereas there could be a multiplicity of views, a multiplicity of dimensions to any given situation, even if that situation looks to be a conflict. And the whole idea of uncommon ground is to be able to use, this is one of the elements that we use, this whole idea of shifting from asking what to asking why, and the entire skill set involved in being able to do it. This is one of the elements we try and use, and it comes from the practice of mediation. It comes from the skills um, that are required for the same. And before I quickly take you to the some more of these kind of elements that we use, I'm just going to take up this question by Smaranita. What if the chefs aren't willing to engage in the why? If the attitude is, I need it and it should matter why I do. Sorry, it shouldn't matter why I do. Smaranita, that is an excellent question. And with that, hang on. With that, I just want to take you through, and I hope this answers your question. If not, I'll definitely come back to it again. I'd like to take you through some of the other elements of the dialogic approach, which again are drawn from mediation, which is one of the established methods of engaging in this approach. And the first, which kind of goes to Smaranita's points, is about what if the chefs aren't willing to engage, is that a good process is able to involve those who need to be involved. And there's a reason for that. And so when we look at the what and the why, we also look at the who as we try and say it. And the who can actually influence the why. So if the attitude is I need it and it shouldn't matter why I do, the who element there also makes it more relevant to the why, which is, hey, you're both chefs in this restaurant. Both of you need to also focus on another who may not be figuring in the argument then and there, who's the people outside who've ordered a particular dish and are waiting for it. They have paid for it. They'd be disappointed if they don't receive it. Many elements involved there. But then when you expand that who, when you try and understand who all are truly involved in that situation, it also gives a slightly different complexity both to the why element. The other element of the dialogic approach is to be able to put the multiple perspectives on the table, so that when we take a decision, we are trying to benefit from an abundance of ideas, but also be able to address as many needs and concerns as we can, the whys that have come up. This also helps us get better information. So, for example, I need it and it shouldn't matter why I do, but I can't make this recipe without orange juice. It tastes horrible, and you know that. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so maybe I do need to give you oranges. But that information can be very different from saying it's my orange and I want it and you shouldn't care why, or you shouldn't care what I'm going to do with it. And then, of course, being able to engage in a process where we're able to analyze alternatives. Okay, do we have time to go buy more oranges? Can we substitute another fruit? Can you maybe find, I don't know, use lemon juice instead of orange juice just for today? What are the alternatives? And what works out from them? And this again comes back to the question of, getting the chefs to agree, getting the chefs engaged in the process, which is that self-determination. The chefs need to be able to say, this is what we're going to agree to do. This is the best way to figure out this problem. Sure, you're a long-standing client, you walked into the kitchen, you're there to help, but still, it's their decision. And the process, if we are able to take them through this process, hopefully improves relationship. It improves both efficiency in the kitchen as well as friendship amongst the chefs and collegiality amongst the chefs. And one of the reasons why that happens is because we are here trying to co-create a consensus or co-create some sort of a decision instead of simply splitting the difference. Splitting the difference will leave one or more parties feeling not quite as happy as they could be. I got only half an orange. My dish doesn't taste the way I want it to. But here, if we have a co-created or a consensus that they have been able to arrive at together, it also reinforces going forward their ability to work together in the kitchen, their ability to hold a cordial relationship, whether at a personal level or at a functional business professional level. And all of these can be important. Why? Because typically, when we think of a problem, when we think of a conflict, our tendency is to look for a way to resolve the problem. But the focus of the dialogic approach is to look not just for resolution, but firstly, a solution, something that is able to address the underlying needs, concerns, factors that underpin the problem, and more importantly, lead to a sustainable solution, one that's not going to collapse the moment, the client has gone back to her table in the dining room and the chefs are back at it again with whatever implements come to handy. So now imagine this is of course supposed to be a humorous as far as I could make it, but also a simple example of how a system like this works. But now just imagine this process being able to get people together to have conversations that lead to sustainable solutions in a more community space, in a more social space, in spaces where it could be a little more than an orange, which is on the table. I'm actually going to pause there. Sorry, I have a question from Sahana, and I'm also going to invite you to ask more questions right now if you'd like, before I proceed to the next section, which is to talk a little bit about our work as well. Sahana has a question which says, here we are assuming that both of them have equal, say, power to claim the orange. What if that's not the case? Yeah, Sahana, this is one of the most important or most critical things that we actually come up against or face with when we get into the actual line of work, which is that there is a power distance, power equations are different, say is different, which is why as somebody who is engaging in the process, the aim of the process is to be able to give that voice to everybody who ought to be at the table and everybody who is impacted by whatever decision is made. So, you have invisible stakeholders, people who are actually not even part of the discussions, but they ought to be. You also have invisible influencers, people who don't seem to have much to do with the situation, but probably have a huge influence on how those present at that table for the discussion are articulating things or making decisions. So, yes, equal say power, dealing with the right stakeholders, dealing with making sure that the process allows for enough vocalization of all perspectives is a very, very important part of it. And what I've shared with you right now are the elements, and when we go through them in greater detail, as we do in some of our other work, we also try and look at how to make sure these ideals are achieved. And I hope that answers your question. We also have a question from Rachita, which is, what about people's biases that often play a role in the outcomes of efforts at dialogue? Absolutely. Biases very often lead to, and I think Tara is also saying pretty much the same thing. Biases often lead us to see a situation in a particular perspective. And being able to be aware of our own bias, as well as understand when inherent or unstated biases may be playing a role in that communication process, is a very, very important skill in being able to lay more perspectives on the table. As I mentioned before, there's probably two elements to this, which I'll come back to again, where when we talk about the dialogic process, one part of it is the principle behind it, the thought behind it, which is what I've been sharing with you in terms of these elements. Let's move from the what to the why. Let's make sure all the stakeholders are present at the table. Let's put more alternatives on the table by thinking from an attitude of abundance about all that is possible. But there is also the other element of how do we do all this? As the person in a dialogue, how do we do all this? And that is also where I will later take you through a little of our work, which has to do not just with presenting these approaches or presenting these ways about thinking about what dialogue can achieve or what it's aimed to achieve, but also how do we get there? Sorry, somebody had their hand up, but it's disappeared. Natasha, could you help me, please? I don't know where I've lost that.
I think maybe your question was answered. I mean, that person's question was answered. But if there are any other questions, we can maybe hold for a second. If there are any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type it in the chat. Okay, Krishna, I think we can carry on.
Thank you. So, sustainable solutions. And yes. Okay, let me very, very quickly share a little bit about our work, which I think this is pretty much what I was just saying, that our aim is to be able to build a social muscle, a societal muscle for engaging in this process, which means, like I said, that of course, these elements that we're talking about are very important in terms of being able to create the space, generate or rather put multiple perspectives on the table, have that sharing of information, be able to listen, get other people to listen, generate possibilities, alternatives, figure out how to move forward from that. But when we talk about building this as a societal muscle, as I just said, at the risk of repeating myself, it involves not just being able to get people to think from the perspective that this is possible, that this has value, but also to be able to work on presenting the right skills or equipping people to be able to engage with the process, go through that process. And our work so far, as I think Natasha, Tara, and we all pointed out earlier, we haven't been around very long. We're a very young initiative. And a lot of our work so far has been at the level of trying to build capacity to engage in the dialogic process by doing exactly this, changing perspectives and developing the skills needed in order to be able to follow through with the process. And I just want to quickly share a small example of how we do this. This is actually a survey from one of the workshop series that we recently finished. And if you look at the pre and the post workshop survey results, the question that was asked to people was, or what was suggested was, people cannot achieve common goals unless they share similar views. So that we don't engage, then we're not going to get anywhere. And if you look at the results that were taken, the responses for the panelists from before the workshop series and after the workshop series, what we see that the number of people who strongly disagree goes up by 20%. So 1/5 of our participants went from saying, yeah, you know what, if we don't share the same view, there's no way we're going to achieve a common goal. From 20% of people change their minds on that process and they say, no, it's now possible. Even if we don't have similar views, we don't agree on everything, we can achieve common goals. And we also see a shift, the number of those who agreed earlier, which was the highest. We didn't have any strongly agrees in the first section. Those who agreed, which was nearly a quarter of the people who attended the workshop, also moved, where they kind of moved like, nah, I don't think it has to be that way. I think possibly, yeah, we might be able to get somewhere, even if we don't share similar views. So this is a small example of how we try and change perspectives, which is get people to think differently about what can be achieved through a dialogic process. And then, of course, offer them, invite them to engage in some skills or develop some skills by which they can continue to do it. So far, we've had a very diverse audience across the Samaj sector. We've worked with a group of young change makers. We've worked with NGOs. We've also been working with trying to take this capacity for engaging in conflict resolution or engaging in the dialogic process to rural women in Karnataka. And I am going to be a little, yes, Uttara, thank you. This is just my opportunity to now pounce on you and say, Uttara of Buzz Women has been involved with us in being able to reach out to rural women. They have been, our access is through their network, and we've also been co-creating the content to take the idea of conflict resolution and dialogue to rural women. And just for that comment, I'm going to put you on the spot, please, and say, can I invite you now to share your thoughts on Uncommon Ground and where you see it fitting in with your work, or anything you'd like to say, really? Nope, not yet, Uttara. Sorry.
Uttara, you're on mute. Can you unmute?
Yes, I did. Thank you so much, Natasha. Thanks, Krishna. Very engaging webinar, I should say. Thanks for that. It's been very exciting to sort of all your anecdotal and the stories that you've been presenting. So I'd like to share our experience of working with Krishna, I think for almost 6 months now, Krishna, I think. And so as an organization, just to give an overview, we are a trust based out of Karnataka. We've been working with rural women for the past 8.5 years, building human capital and social capital. I'm a cost accountant, so began from the whole financial management, financial literacy perspective, but then moved on to add more elements to it, which is psychological empowerment, social empowerment, and now ecological empowerment. The idea being that providing knowledge, skills, and tools at the doorstep of underprivileged women, they will take their own decisions and take on their problems to find their own solutions. So basically, problem solvers at rural level. That's what we work on. So when I got connected with Krishna, I was very excited because this is something that I have always believed in. So I believe that any problem can be solved using dialogues. And we have been trying to sort of use it in our work. So our role plays, our games, all of it from the first day, that whatever interventions that we do have this element of dialogue. We call it conflict resolution, of course, but the idea is that not to look at a problem as something that you have to fight on, but how to resolve it together as a family. So as an example, the women always talk about how one of the biggest conflicts at home is on money, and how the conversation usually starts with you're spending too much, or you're drinking too much, or you're not earning enough and we are poor. To shift that conversation to saying that, okay, what is the problem at hand? The problem at hand is that we don't have enough money. And what is the solution? How can we find more money, or how can we look at our expenses? How do we make sure that we are part of the same team and not fighting against each other? So that's been our approach. And I think there are some similarities to what Krishna mentioned in terms of the dialogue and what we were trying to do. So when Krishna and I started talking, firstly, we looked at our existing curriculum, the 2 half-day sessions that we do. And we really wanted to re-look at it from the perspective of this interest and position. And by the way, thanks for teaching me that, Krishna. That was one of my aha moments, knowing the difference between the two and to articulate it a certain way. We did an extensive exercise with looking at every role play that we had. And you wouldn't believe we have not increased the time of the training, because that was one of the constraints, saying we cannot increase the time because as it is, women have a constraint on time. So we cannot increase our curriculum. At the same time, we have to use our existing modules on financial management, personal management, entrepreneurship, etc. And this has to come somewhere in the middle. Krishna was very gracious to work with us to make sure that that happens. So that first level of curriculum got built. The next level is post the 2 half-day sessions among every village group. We ask them to identify a woman to be the community anchor. We call her a Gelati, which means a friend, a Sathi or a Sakhi. In Kannada, it is Gelati. So this Gelati, then we also engage with her every month over a period of time, so that she goes back into her villages and has this dialogue process at a SHG level, and then at a community level. So the idea is to build this capability in a layered manner. So for that also, Krishna has created another curriculum, and we are in the process of setting it up so that we can roll it out very soon. We have a base of around 2.25 lakh women in Karnataka, in 5 districts, South Karnataka, and also around 3,000 such Gelatis who are volunteers. So we are very excited that this year we'll be able to sort of disseminate this among them and to see what all changes come about. I am very hopeful, and that hope also comes from the fact that, just to give you a story, probably 3 or 4 years back, so in our curriculum for the Gelatis, one of the activities that we do is on active listening. And one of the Gelatis came back after a few months of having done the training and then having implemented in her household. She said they had a property dispute in her family, which was running for 15 years. It was not in a court. They always, in villages, they also try to resolve these things through panchayat involvement and local elders who come together. She said what she realized after the active listening session was that she herself was not listening. She realized that every time somebody spoke to her, she was already thinking about how to come up with a rebuttal. And after going through the session, she built her own skill to say, this is how I'm going to handle it. And the exciting part was that they actually resolved that dispute. A 15-year-old property dispute got resolved because this woman took charge. She got the skill, she built the skill, and she took charge of the problem in her household, and she was able to resolve it. So that's what gives me hope that one woman who, I mean, with whatever we had done as an intervention, was able to do this. If we actually take this dialogue process and are able to implement in every village, there would be so many disputes and so many conflicts that can find sustainable solutions. And most often, that is what is missing right now. As we all know, that poverty is not just economic poverty, but it's also the poverty of probably opportunities and capability, which we believe that one of the elements of this can be involved. So we look forward to working with Krishna and making sure that this is rolled out to all the villages we work in. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Uttara. It's actually been such a pleasure and a privilege. And I should, and I should frankly share this with everyone. Working with Uttara and her team in developing the Buzz Women curriculum has been so essential to how we've been able to work around the language of how we communicate, how we are, because these, as I said before, a lot of what we're talking about is inspired by the principles of mediation. The process has been tried and tested and has found both scientific validation and commercial success in the field of mediation. But to be able to take this and try and build social capacity has involved a rethink of how we articulate so many things. And working with Buzz Women has been such an amazing experience, where now, in fact, as I was telling the team the other day, I actually try and figure out a word in either Kannada or Tamil or Hindi, and then try and figure it out into English, because then I realize it probably makes a lot more sense that way than, just slotting in some legal jargon, which is almost instinctive to me as a lawyer. And thank you once again, Uttara, for sharing your experience, as well as for being a co-creator and being together with us on this journey. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Krishna. Thanks for the opportunity to share as well. And I really do look forward to expanding this. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Speaking of expansion, I'd also quickly like to just share what our next steps are, next plans are, before we throw the floor open for some discussion. As Uttara mentioned, that we are now working to develop the module for Gelatis too, and this is something that we are trying to develop across the various organizations and audiences that we're working with, which is not just to engage in the process, but to now have the capacity to facilitate the process, to be able to be, the person in the kitchen between the chefs, getting them to talk to each other, getting them to figure out a solution. So the initial capacity building has to do with being able to engage oneself in a dialogic process. And at level 2, we want to foster the capacity to facilitate a dialogic process in groups and communities. We also hope to expand our audience within the Samajik sector as well as across sectors. So yeah, much work to be done as we move along. As we go about our capacity building vertical, we also realize that we have two very we believe there are two very essential functions in terms of being able to practice those who are support those who are practicing a dialogic process, whether within an organization or at an individual level, or as further dissemination of the facilitation process. So we are thinking, didn't that? I'm so sorry, Natasha. I did change. I forgot to click resume share. Sorry about that. So thanks. So our other verticals have to do with being able to support those who are now willing to engage in the practice of a dialogic process, and also to be able to hold space for those who are engaging in this process, to build a community where we co-create this as we go along, as we are able to learn from each other and do things as we go along. So we are also looking to develop our practice support and community building verticals, which we're trying to experiment with some different ways of doing that. And on that note, any thoughts you might have on how we can do some of these things, any feedback or questions are most appreciated. I should just quickly end by telling you that my intent today has been to tease you into possibly attending a session where we talk a little more about how to do some of these things that we are aspiring to do and talk about. Yeah, so hopefully, if you'd like to learn more about this, we also look forward to talking to you about. We look forward to talking to you more about it. And yeah, can we throw the floor open? How do we want to do the comments Q&A, Natasha? And of course, Tara, Natasha, Gautam, anything you'd like to add on, please?
Sure. Thank you so much, Krishna. Thanks for taking us through this. And I wanted to just share a little bit of reflection from our side as we've sort of started to build this out as well. The first thing is that we're very cognizant of the fact that on a day-to-day basis, all of us negotiate various kinds of micro and macro conflicts. And it's not something that we don't do or that society doesn't do or has not done in the past. What our intent with, let's say, this work that we're doing in Uncommon Ground is really trying to, one, build a structure around this as a method so that it can also have a learning component for those who want to, sort of get a little bit better at it and become more aware of how to build their capacities in this direction. The other thing that we are very aware of is that practice is really a big part of behavior change, and even learning to listen or learning to dialogue, taking a leap of faith, suspending bias, and sometimes even suspending that instinct to react immediately. All of these things are very instinctual, and it takes a tremendous amount of practice. And sometimes it takes, like micro steps. So the first time you actually curb your instinct to respond makes you a little bit stronger the next time when you have to do that in any situation. So that's a really big part of our work, which we are really trying to understand a lot better in terms of how we build this as a practice that people can do. So those are the two things that I just sort of wanted to add as a kind of thing that we hope to explore. We hope to collaborate with a lot of you on the call on as well. And with this, we would also really love to understand any comments, any questions, anything that you feel, and sometimes some of the questions that were raised, in fact, even Smaranita asked about what if people just don't want to listen, and that happens. That completely happens. But we also think of this as, how do we build greater appetite to persevere in the face of people who may not want to listen? So that, there are elements of that. There is, of course, the element of power. We're very aware of that as well, that once you bring people into the room, you can support them to dialogue. But oftentimes, it's very difficult to bring the people into the room. So these are vectors with which we are definitely engaging. And therefore, also, we'd love to understand your experiences and everybody's experiences in the room. So, with that, I'd really love to hear some reactions as well, and maybe some questions and maybe some challenges to some of our thinking as well. Uttara, maybe offer your services to resolve the farm bill disagreement.
I was
Krishna?
pretending to ignore that. I was pretending I hadn't seen that. No, I think it's clearly, I think, one of those issues. In fact, I was just reading one of Sriram Panchu. I think, yeah, Tara just posted that. Sriram Panchu, one of the pioneers of mediation in India, his thoughts on the use of mediation to be able to resolve this sort of a situation. But I think this is also, again, one of those areas that, again, this may be an aspirational statement on my part, and please take it as that with all the idealism of somebody who, those who've just started on this journey, which is that building something like this as a civic capacity allows for a certain non-formalized process to diffuse into play. And in fact, as Natasha was sharing, these ideas aren't new. Or as even Uttara said, in the village, you don't go to court. You still and try and figure it out with the village elders, which probably also makes sense why when we talk about dialogue and we start off with the Greek of it, but we find that, hey, this principle exists, whether it's in Tamil, Bengali, or Hindi. And this whole idea of let's just put our heads together to figure this out and come up with a solution that is based on cooperation and understanding. These are not at all new ideas in that sense. And where we are trying to add value is to be able to bridge what is this very probably uncodified but culturally held element on the one hand, with this very formally defined, commercially tested, well-used method of mediation on the other, and to be able to bridge this to say, what is there that, great, farmers bill, yes, hopefully let's get some experienced mediators in there that might help. But are there other things we can do? Is there a culture of communication, of dialogue that we set into place so that it is possible to approach these issues from a, you know what, I'm going to stop rambling and give you a very simple example. Grey the Farmers Bill again, Uttara, since you raised it, which is in the same day, 3 different newspapers gave me completely 3 different impressions about what was going on with the Farm Bill. Why? Because perspective, position is reduced to a headline, a soundbite. But behind it are the nuances that hopefully a dialogic process can bring out. And when those nuances are brought out, it is possible to focus on solutions than just on saying, who should I agree with? Who should I disagree with? Who's right and who's wrong? And we are able to move away from binaries of right and wrong to ask, how do we fix this? How do we make everyone happy? How do we give everybody what they really need? How do we address their concerns? And so the focus becomes on what can be achieved instead of simply what needs to be said. Yeah, and on that very passionate note, I shall pause.
Tara, would you like to add something?
Yeah, actually, the point that one of the objectives of the Uncommon Ground project is to be able to influence our response to issues like the farmer bill issue in a manner where dialogue is possible. Right now, our instinctive response is not to be able to facilitate a dialogic process. And how is it through initiatives and endeavors like this that we take out into our respective communities, when a conflict begins, we have systems in place that support the resolution of that issue through the dialogic method. And this case is a classic example where this process is far more amenable to the resolution of the issue than a formal court system. Like the court really does not have a place, but that's where we all run because that's what the response mechanism that we know. But if, as a community, we were able to set up systems from the get-go so that our response to it would be different and would allow a facilitation, that would allow a dialogue, that's when the real change begins to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, Krishna, one, for the benefit of the others as well, if you could share that anecdote about how when you tried to talk about abundance with some of our workshop participants in English versus when you tried it in Kannada, because the reason I ask you to share that is one of the things we are really trying to understand is the contextualization and the native approaches in India, where our strengths lie also in terms of our predispositions maybe to more consensus versus not. And, so if you could just share that anecdote.
Thanks for the in, Natasha. Yeah, it's very interesting. Abundance was one. The other most interesting is what I shared with you today, the orange story, where the what is the chef saying, I want the orange. What do you want? I want the orange. And why is because I need to use the juice of the orange versus I need to use the peel of the orange. In mediation speak, those are known as positions and interests. So position is what I'm stating as this is what I want, the what, and interest is the why behind whatever statement it is I'm making. And it has interestingly happened that earlier on in our journey, as we were trying to build our curricula, when I've gone out there and introduced this as positions and interests instead of what and why, and it's a cross-sector audience. And that word has been understood from interest in terms of, is there a financial element to it? Are we talking about interest as in something akin to interest payable? Or is it something that interests me, like a hobby, like I care about it? Versus what is your interest in this? What is my underlying, not even in a positive sense motivation, but more like what is my underlying, what is it I want to get out of this? My so just that one word interest, which has such a defined, and this is where also relating back to what I was saying earlier about taking something that is well defined in its own practice and works beautifully, but being able to contextualize it to use in a culture that is adapted and very much welcoming and fostering and is probably given rise to many thoughts of it, but being able to bridge this language gap, language not only in a linguistic sense, but also in associated meaning sense. I mean, a lawyer, a banker, and an artist will understand the word interest very, very differently. And we're using it in a fourth context altogether. So along with the novelty of the ideas and trying to get people to shift their perspective, we're also grappling with being able to present it in a form that allows for direct engagement with the idea instead of being constrained by the linguistic as well as structural antecedents of the disciplines that inform it. And if anybody has experiences, thoughts to share on that, we'd be most grateful for that, because yes, this is something that we face on a daily basis. And yeah, and in fact, that's where Uttarayan working with Buzz Women has been super, super helpful, because like I said, now I start trying to think in an Indian language and then use the English for it. Which doesn't always work, but so if any of you have any advice on how to go about this, we'd be most grateful.
Wonderful. I think this is quite a lot to also sort of
take in at one
process
point.
And take in. So, if there are no immediate questions, then we would love to sort of conclude today by throwing open an invitation for all of everybody who wants to sort of be involved in this, everybody who wants to co-create this journey with us. Please feel free to write to me, Krishna. This is going to be an evolving thought process as well, and it will be an evolving approach. So this is just the first introduction, and it's the starting of the conversation. And thank you so much, Krishna, for taking us through this. And if you have any closing thoughts, then please leave us with those.
Thank you. But as Gautam just said, I believe Rohini is here. Would she like to, Rohini, would you like to say something, please? Can we impose on you to do that?
Just give me a second. Rohini, you can mute yourself now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, hi, everyone. And thank you for participating in this. Thank you, Krishna, Tara. Thank you, my team, Natasha, Gautam. I'm so happy that we are all beginning a journey together. I think it's, as I think everyone can acknowledge, this is a very important thing to try and make successful a culture where we can go beyond binaries and to find really good, simple, understandable methodologies by which we do so. I think that's the thing. I mean, everyone understands this concept at some intellectual level or even at a heart level that, oh, we should all get along. But how do we do it? No, the Talberg Foundation in Switzerland, their tagline is, how on earth can we live together? And they mean every word of that, because the planet's sustainability is what they care about. So how on earth can we live together? So we'll try to find some line that suggests in the same powerful way what we are all together trying to achieve. But I feel very hopeful, because even if I look at America today, literally today, I mean, not day before yesterday, but today, I think there is a kind of a weariness of that constant negative energy which is on display, and which many of us also put on display sometimes, just because you're constantly facing opposition, you're constantly facing a polarized position, right? Then you also tend to respond in that manner. But I think a weariness has settled in, and that's exactly the wedge we need to push in a new positive energy of dialogue and conversation. So I'm very excited to be on this journey. Certainly, I also need to learn a lot about how to be more in dialogic mode. So I look forward to creating the structures for us all to do so. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Rohini. All right. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. We will share the recording once the session closes. And if there are any questions, as I'd mentioned, please feel free to write to us. And have a wonderful weekend ahead, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Namaste.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.